Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be making a lotus blossom inspired piece utilising a donut or Torus bead. Let's head down to the board, take a closer look, and then we'll make one together. Now I've made this demonstration piece utilising the May Relax and Craft box, but I will tell you exactly what we're going to work with today. It's a 30mm donut or Torus bead. Fleur kindly sent me this beautiful tiger's eye to work with, and I have this snowflake obsidian from my stash box. So we're also going to be working with 0.8mm, and that relates to 20 gauge wire if you are stateside. It's a single piece of wire, there's no complicated weaving. The only other tools we're really going to work with are some flat facing pliers, some chain nose pliers, flush cutters, and a round form. Now I have this lovely beadle-on wooden mandrel which is around about 0.62 of an inch, 15.8mm, but a chunky marker pen or a thick lipstick, something like that, will be absolutely perfect to help create the lotus inspired part of this design. I have an 18-inch length cut of 0.8, 20 gauge. Now this is a gunmetal colour which I think will work really beautifully with my demonstration piece here in that snowflake obsidian. If I was going to recreate this design, I would be very happy to use 1mm or 18 gauge wire. So with that 18-inch length, we're just going to start by gently conditioning that wire, grab a hold of one end and run that 2 or 3 times between thumb and forefinger. We finally got some warmth in the UK today, so it's not too difficult to get that to work for me. So let's just pop the stone and the pendant up to the top corner. I'm going to start a couple of inches from one end of the wire, and what I'm going to do is to start wrapping around, but I want to concentrate on bringing those passes of wire quite close together around the mandrel. And again, this is 15.8mm mandrel, so just under 16mm, and a chunky marker pen or a chubby lipstick will work very well for this. This is a beadle-on product. So I'm going to leave this on the mandrel, and I've got about 4 or 5 inches on one end and about 3 or 4 inches on the other end. It doesn't really matter at this stage which way is which. The main thing is that I want to keep those wires as close together as possible, just to make my life easier at the next step. So we need to make sure, let me just flip that over, that there are 5 passes of wire. If I just spread them out, you've got 5 passes of wire. And then on the underside of the design, those 2 wires are crossing in opposite directions. So I do have one wire which is slightly longer than the other, and I'm going to use that to bring first across those passes of wire as if you're making a wrapped ring. I'm going to flip the design around and do the exact same thing in the opposite direction for now, so that those 2 passes of wire are coming together. Now it doesn't matter if that bags out ever so slightly, but ideally we want to keep those passes of wire as close as we can around that mandrel. So the slightly longer piece of wire I'm going to turn into the bail wire in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is to work on the slightly longer piece. If they're exactly the same length, don't worry about it, it's not a massive problem. I'm going to grip that wire approximately halfway across that little bundle on the underside and pull it away. So if I show you that from above and then from the side, and then what we're going to do is to use the slightly shorter piece of wire if you have one. Give that a really good warm through. It's important that this is nice and fluid. Now what we're going to do is to try and press down on those outer wires. So you've got an outer wire this side, an outer wire this side. Try and keep them as much as possible in their position, and then we're going to bring that shorter wire which we've just warmed through around the sticky uppy bit, which was the slightly longer wire. Now it's much easier to do if you've got it a little bit closer to your face and not face down on a board. I'm only doing it in this fashion because I need to show you how it comes together. So I'm just going to run the slightly shorter wire around the slightly longer wire about 3 or 4 times, and I want that to be a really nice, neat, tight rotation of wire. So I'm just going to very softly tweak that. Don't put too much pressure on the design, because when you press wire onto wire with pliers, it's very easy to put too much pressure on and then you generate a weak spot because you've pressed them together. So I've wrapped I think 2.5 times. What I don't want to do also is knacker my camera. So I'm just going to make that nice and firm, give that a little bit of a squish. The next thing I'm going to do is to just push that little wrap of wire down against the mandrel, and I'm going to loosely hold the slightly longer wire and just push that back towards the mandrel. So I've got these beautiful mandrels from Beadalon, which are workhorses. They see lots and lots of work on a daily basis, so don't use something that you're very precious about. So what we can see now, if I just remove the mandrel, is that you've got those 5 passes of wire all the way around like so, and then you've connected it together across the outside. It's going to be a very dangerous ring to wear, so don't do that. I'm just going to put my thumb inside to make sure that I don't pull anything out of shape, and just run my fingers on both of those wires a couple of times to ensure that they're nice and fluid before we move on to the next step. For the next step, I'm going to be utilising some flat pliers. Now these are Beadalon standard pliers, and they are the same distance across the pin on the base by the box joint as they are at the tip. So they're really handy to have when you're working with wire. The next thing I'm going to do is going to take just a little bit of control. It's not difficult. You just need to slow down. Make sure that you don't squish things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grip across that little bundle of wires. I'm going to pop my finger inside the bundle, and I'm just going to twist gently to start generating a little bit of a shape. And if I do that on both sides, you'll see that that now resembles more closely a balloon than a round form. So I've done that on the end closest to the connection point. I'm going to put my finger back inside, and equal and opposite, I'm going to grip the little bundle of wires again, and I'm just going to twist, and all I'm doing is a very soft manoeuvre. First of all, it looks a little bit like a lemon or a leaf. Grip again on the other side and pull again. So we now have almost an eye shape design. So if it's slightly off to one side, it doesn't really matter, but you can endeavour to keep that fairly close together. Now at this stage, these 3 passes of wire down at the base that are inside are freely moving. Let me just very gently and softly bring that down out of the way. The reason I'm telling you that is because when we start to prise these shapes open, the ones in the middle, the 3 little lemon shapes in the middle, might get a bit leery and start moving around, but it's important that you just move slowly so that you can generate your beautiful lotus blossom easily. If you pop this shorter wire, which I'll show you in a second what we're going to do, if you pop that through, you can disrupt how beautifully springy and easy to adapt this design is. So we'll get to that in just a moment. So I'm just going to open this out ever so slightly more, just to make sure that they are as far apart as I want them to be. Ideally, we want them to have equal distances between each of the tips. Now, in a minute, we can refine those tips. If you want them to be a little pointier, then you absolutely can. But for right now, we're all good. What I'm going to do is just push everything gently back down towards that nexus point, because what we're going to do now is to take the shorter of the 2 wires. Let's give it a really good warm through, 4 or 5 times between thumb and forefinger. We're going to bring that up and away first of all, and then I'm going to make sure that when I push this tip of the wire down, it goes through every single one of those 3 central pieces. You don't need to worry overly much about the rear one, as long as they go through the middle 3 and the front one. I've actually managed to get that tip through the base of that last one as well, but if you can't quite manage it, don't worry. So I'm going to push that all the way through, and then I'm going to start to very softly pull that down into position. Now everything will spring ever so slightly. This is not an advanced project, it just takes a little bit of control and time. I'm going to pull that all the way through now, like so that we've connected all of those petals together. If you have to miss the one at the back because it's just too difficult, don't worry about it. That won't cause you much of a problem later. What I do want to do is to get as much slack out of this shorter wire as I can. So if that means using a pair of pliers to hold the nexus point where everything wraps together, or use your pliers to pull that through, then you absolutely can. We just want to retain the form of that lotus blossom as much as possible. So we're looking at the rear of the design at the moment, and you can see that the wire has travelled through the base of all of the petals and across the back. Now it's good and tight, I'm going to wrap over the longer wire And I'm going to draw that all the way around that wire at least one time. In fact, I think I'll go for twice and just tighten that up slightly. So I'm just compressing those wraps to make sure that it's a good, strong connection. Now at this stage, you can pull the wires ever so slightly more. You can adapt the ends of those petals if you want to generate a little bit more of a lemon shape, or you can form it into a perfect eye shape. It's absolutely up to you. At this stage, you can add a little bit of strength to the tips of those petals as well, which I will show you in just a second. I just want them to resemble each other as much as possible. So you could very softly tap on a block with a hammer just on the ends of those petals, but what I'm going to do today is just softly open and close my pliers on the tips of the petals a couple of times just to strengthen them up. There we go. So what we're going to do now is to utilise the shorter length of wire to generate a small spiral. We've actually flipped over to the rear of the design, as I think that's ever so slightly neater. If this is your neater side, then use that as the front. I'm going to use this side. Just going to make sure that all of those wraps are really good and strong. I'm going to warm through the longer length and push it rearwards. So if this is my front because it's slightly neater, then the long wire is going to go towards the back, and then the shorter wire, you can trim this away to anywhere between an inch and a half, as we're going to generate a spiral to sit over the face of all the gubbins where everything is held together. And you may need to just slightly centralise that to make sure that the flower sits centrally. So I'm going to trim just the tiniest amount off, and the remaining wire is probably about 1 3/4 inches in fact. You can use round pliers if you prefer for this next step. I'm going to grab my memory wire finishing pliers. If you don't have any, head on over to Beadalon or to Jessie James Beads to see if they have any. I'm not getting a kickback from this. I just really like the products. So let's give that a squish, and we're going to bring that towards the centre of the design. Bearing in mind that the longer tail has gone to the back. So once you've got the spiral as close as possible to the middle of your design, I'm going to give that a really good squish. So Fleur has sent with the Relax and Craft May box some 0.8 or 20 gauge wire. If I was creating this again, I would probably go for a 1mm wire, but I'm actually really loving the difference. Once I've got the spiral to the centre of the design, I'm just going to flip that up and sit it over the base of my lotus blossom design. I do hope that you're enjoying today's Lotus Blossom tutorial. I'm utilising the beautiful tiger's eye from Fleur's Relax and Craft subscription box for May. You can use any 30mm Torus or donut bead if you prefer. I'll talk to you a little bit more about Relax and Craft later on, but this is a beautiful alternative. If you're not so much into the chainmail, you can always hop on over here and look at some wire. Let's head back down to the board and we'll craft on, making the next stage of today's tutorial. So we've got our lotus blossom design all ready to move on, and we've got the wire coming backwards. That was the slightly longer of the two wires. All we're going to do now is to just pop that through the centre of the donut or Torus bead and just have a look at how that sits. So what I need to do here is to bring the rear wire up just a little bit more. So I'm going to push that as close as I can to that wrapping, post the wire back through, and then sit the bead where I think it looks best. So this beautiful wire that came from a previous Relax and Craft box looks really mean and moody with this fabulous snowflake obsidian. I also have a gorgeous lapis lazuli, so I'm just going to swap that in, and I think that actually looks a bit nicer. So we're going to switch over. Again, it's a 30mm Torus or donut bead. I carry these on my live shows, or you can always give me a message on Facey, and I do supply these, so you can always find something different if you're not into that one. So what we're going to do now is to push that through the Torus bead as much as we can, pushing the lotus blossom over the surface and backwards for now, and we're just kind of creating a bit of a dome so that that snuggles against the gemstone. What we're going to do now is to really warm through that tail of wire, because the next thing I'm going to do is to tuck it up between the middle petal. So make sure that's good and warm. So if you do choose to make this with 1mm gauge wire, just make sure you really give it a good warm. Now the reason that we domed that wire over the surface is to make sure that we get a good tight fit on the bead itself. So again, a little bit of warmth goes a long way, and also putting a tiny bit of a point on each of the petals means that it kind of becomes a little bit more self-supporting. If it's very rounded at the top, then it kind of moves around a little bit too much. So I'm going to generate a forwards bend. You can see my tail wire has come all the way through the central petal and sits on the front of the design. What we're going to do now is to just grip across very, very close to the tip, push the wire forwards. Now you can use any round form to generate your bail. I'm going to grab my 6-step bail makers, and I think I'm going to use step number 3 today for this. So just a standard wrapped loop up at the top, bring that wire all the way around. So I've slightly bent that sideways, so I'm just going to make sure that that sits up at the top in a good straight line, giving it a bit of a squish just to make sure it's good and strong. So I'm going to wrap twice around the upright just above the tip of that central petal. So grip across, draw the wire all the way around twice, and I'm going to leave that on the rear of the design for a second. Give that a little bit of a squish, just make sure everything is firmly wrapping together. We don't want any movement later on. So to tie everything together, I'm going to take this tail wire, which is wrapped around the neck of the design below the wrapped loop bail. So you can see the neck has come up in the front of the tip of the middle petal. I'm going to push that into position. What I'm going to do now is to bring the tail of the wire back through the tip of the same petal, and it was the central petal, so you will need to give this a really good warm, especially if you're working with that 1mm wire. So get that good and toasty, because we're going to ask it to come all the way through, and we want it to do that without disrupting the position of the petal or of the wrapped loop bail. So grip hold of that bail, bring the wire all the way through, get the bail to sit above the tip of that central flower, and I'm going to wrap that one more time over the top of the double wrap we created underneath that wrapped loop bail. So all the way around the back once and across the front. This strengthens the bail, especially if you are using that 0.8 or 20 gauge wire. Now I've got around about 1.5 inches of wire remaining. It's already flush cut on the end, so all I'm going to do to finish this design off is turn another small spiral and sit it over the gubbins at the top, just underneath that wrapped loop bail. So you can use a round form, you can use your bail makers, you can use round pliers, or you can, like myself, utilise these fabulous memory wire finishing pliers. Ever so useful things to have. I tend to use them more and more often in place of round pliers, just because it means I get the same central aperture over and over again on my designs. So draw that all the way around until it sits over the centre, and that will sit just underneath the wrapped bail up at the top. Give it a squish to make it nice and strong, and then I'm going to support that wrapped bail whilst I push the wire down over the gubbins. Just push that into position. Now you can play around with the number of wraps you have. If you end up with lots and lots of wire remaining up at the top, then you can flip this around and stick that little spiral wherever you fancy. If I just bring the two designs in together, when I created the first wraps at the top utilising the gorgeous copper wire, I did about 5 wraps. On here I had significantly less wire remaining, so I elected to do just 2 wraps underneath the wrapped bail. I think honestly it looks a bit better being higher, but if you also want to add a little further dimension to the design, something that I added after the event is to push those petals back even further over that gorgeous donut or Torus bead, and then I gripped the tip of each petal and just bent that forward, so you can see there's a little bit of a very purposeful kink on the end, and then on the other side as well. It means that the bead moves slightly less and you get quite a pointy mandala inspired effect. If you find that you need to adjust the petals, you do have the capacity to do so. You can also spread them out just a little bit further. So that's my interpretation of a lotus blossom. I've been making lotus blossoms for as long as I've been playing with wire, since about 2013. So I really love this design and I thought it was time to interpret it for a pendant. A lot of what my jewellery turns out to be is a pendant. So I hope that you have enjoyed the lotus blossom inspired pendant utilising a donut or Torus bead. If you want to find out a little bit more about Fleur's Relax and Craft service, it's a monthly subscription box. You can subscribe for the period of time that suits you. Each month there will be different tutorials provided by Fleur. Also, Katie Parker and myself often add extra tutorials based on various boxes throughout the year. I tend to work primarily in wire because it's my first jewellery love. Katie does a lot of projects with crochet as well as wire too. So you can obviously take a look at all of the past boxes. You can have a look on Fleur's Facebook group for some further inspiration. Also, every time you leave a subscription on my channel here on YouTube and you drop a comment, drop a like on the videos, it really helps me to be seen by the wider community. Thanks so much for watching today and I hope that you enjoy your day.